Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, this is Red Berry Wheel here, and welcome back to another Civil Air Patrol video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about a F&P section within GTM3, or the Familiarization and Preparatory Training for a Ground Team Member 3 qualification, and that is cold weather injuries. And cold weather injuries are a result of the unstoppable cooling of the body, and so I'm going to go a little bit over preventing cold weather injuries and talk a little bit about what they are and how to get things back to normal. Let's talk about different ways that we can prevent cold weather injuries. So one of the steps that you can take is by wearing clothes and like gloves and things, mittens, everything like that to cover your extremities. So you especially want to watch out for your toes and your fingertips because those are more prone to cold weather injuries. The reason for that is because there is reduced blood flow to the external parts of your body or even like the tips of your ears. So by wearing like a wool hat or wearing several socks, like layers of socks, and making sure that you're taking care of your fingers, then that will reduce potential for getting things like frostbite later on. There's also wearing layers. So some people, they just get this giant puffy jacket and that's all they've got. And then that puffy jacket is too hot. And then when they take off the big fluffy jacket, it's too cold. So by wearing layers, you can take the layers off one at a time as needed until you get to the temperature that you need. You want to try to reduce the amount of sweating that you're having when you're out and about, because if you're wet, you cool down faster. So by having layers and adjusting as needed so that you can regulate your internal temperature, then that is the optimal thing to do. So there's also wearing clothes that allow air to be trapped in, but while also letting moisture leave. So like wool is a really good example of this. But if you think of rubber, rubber completely prevents the passing of moisture, and by being wet, you will cool down faster. Other important things to keep in mind is if someone already has had cold weather injuries, you want to keep an eye on them. So like having the buddy system and just making sure that you're aware of people's conditions ahead of time is a really important thing to have. And you want to ensure that your team members are being regularly checked on, whether it be through the buddy system or the team leader checking in on everyone. Honestly, everyone should just be looking out for one another to make sure we're all staying safe and healthy. And another big one, just a general thing, make sure you have changes of like underwear and socks. That's a big one because if your undergarments get wet and sweaty, then you don't want it to be wet and sweaty for a long period of time. Like, for example, during World War I, they did not have changes of socks, and they had fungi growing on their feet because their feet were always wet all the time. So sweat can be bad in that way, and also it can increase the chances of your feet getting frostbite and your toes getting frostbite, because if your feet are all sweaty and they aren't breathing enough and getting that circulation of air, because boots don't necessarily have the best ventilation, just having extra pairs of socks, especially when it's cold out, is really important. And layering them if you need to layer your socks. Let's talk about hypothermia and frostbite. Frostbite I'm going to talk about first. Frostbite is the affliction to the extremities where you have lost or have a reduced amount of blood flow because of how cold they are. So like the first step of frostbite is where the extremities start to turn like a reddish color, and then they'll turn to like a white waxy color. And when that starts to happen, there are a few steps that we can take to remedy this. So the warmest parts of your body are underneath your armpits and behind your knees. So if that member has hypothermia in addition to frostbite, then having another team member like warm their hands up is a good way to do that, as long as they have permission to do it. And a sign that the extremities are being warmed up would be if they start to feel like a tingling, burning sensation, because that means the blood is coming back. One big important thing about that, though, is if someone has frostbite, please do not massage the extremity, because if there is reduced blood flow, you know how fingers are pretty fragile anyway, humans are fragile. They won't feel the pain, but you could snap something off. So just please do not massage things. In the later stage of frostbite is where the extremities go from like a yellowish to a bluish grayish color, which is really bad, and they should seek emergency medical attention immediately. If medical attention isn't immediately available, then immersing that extremity in warm water, not hot, but warm water, will allow circulation to at least start to happen, and make sure that the extremity does not touch the edges of the container as it's being immersed in that water. So let's talk about hypothermia. So the first stage, or like the earlier stage of hypothermia, is where there's numbness and uncontrollable shaking. And hypothermia, just generally speaking, is the overall systemic cooling down of the entire body. And some steps to try to get a control over this would be to have the person remove any wet clothes, because it's actually worse to have wet clothes on than like none at all. So like having extra clothes available as well helps with that. Keeping the core of the body is more important than the extremities, because you want to increase the blood flow to the important things that are required to keep the person alive versus the things that are good to have, but they aren't essential to being alive. And there's also just keeping in mind that you want to keep them warm and dry if possible. Like if there's an indoor building, like bringing them indoors versus keeping them outdoors and having them warm up gradually. The later stage of hypothermia starts to escalate from the earlier stage, where there is the slowing down of respiration and heart rate. There's also drowsiness and the person just not being able to cognitively perform simple actions and tasks. There's also failing eyesight, or having like a glassy stare where they're just kind of not really present, and they can even lose consciousness if it gets too severe. And if that's the case, then they require immediate medical attention, and you would take the same steps to try to warm that person back up by, like, if you have hot packs, I forgot to mention this in the earlier section, if you have hot packs, putting them on their neck, putting them under the armpits or in the groin area are good ways to try to help heat that person up. And in addition to that, putting them in the head down position is how you would try to alleviate that hypothermia. But at that point, there isn't a whole lot we can do. It really does require that medical assistance. So that was everything I wanted to discuss for cold weather injuries. If you do have any questions for me, please feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and that is all, folks. Until next time, toodles.